Go on, say it. This is the BQ Hurricane. I liked it. It was the first commercial clipper bed slinger. This is the new SOVOL SV07, and yeah, it's also a bed slinger, and it's also got clipper. My main criticisms with the Hurricane were that BQ hadn't managed to get a good screen, a second Z screw, and worst of all, a direct drive on their machine, in order to hit the price point of around $400. Well, whether you like it or not, 6 months-ish later, SOVOL have. It's slightly more surprising that SOVOL have released a clipper bed slinger, although maybe it's not. The evolution to clipper is as predictable as it gets. I called it at least one review ago on the Chidi X Smart 3. Everyone wants clipper now, and so everyone gets clipper, but this timeline is running at an insane speed. When I first asked SOVOL if they were working on a clipper printer and they admitted it, this would have been sometime in February maybe, and they were already most of the way through development. At this time there were no Core XYs apart from the Bamboo Lab, and that's a $1,000 printer. There were no other clipper printers on the market other than the Hurricane. So, finally in May, here we have a bed slinger with clipper, with POM wheels, and a huge chunky blue hot end. For better or worse. Let's go over the specs, then we'll do some tests and see how it performs. The extruder on this machine is not new. That's actually a good thing, because under the plastic shroud it's almost identical to the SV06 Plus, except for the mount. This one screws on from the back. Also, the LEDs have required a slight modification, it seems, to the tool board on the back. The reason for the giant cowling is to hang the LEDs on. I can't think of any other reason. It's almost unnecessary otherwise. The machine will run happily without it. If you think you have a better way to add these LEDs, then you can go ahead. If you're thinking you can add these LEDs to the SV06 toolhead though, I think you're wrong. I'll have to defer to SOVOL to explain whether that's possible or not, but I don't think it's got the pinout. Being identical otherwise to the SV06 Plus means that I can conclude straight away that it will print most materials exactly the same as that machine did. Go and watch that review if you want to see what the performance looked like. We're talking about 300 degrees C, and we're talking about all metal heat break, so that's actually quite a good combination. Most people seem to like it. If you remember, one of my main comments though on this extruder was that the cooling couldn't keep up with the flow rate on the hot end, especially with the Volcano version that this is, which is from the SV06 Plus. And that's probably why this thing has been bolted onto the back of the gantry. It's not the worst idea actually. The gantry here doesn't really move except in Z, which is of course a much slower movement where weight is relatively meaningless, and so weight bolted onto it doesn't really matter, and this fan will work kind of like a curtain fan, like in a Core XY. It's actually a perfectly fine idea, as weird as it may look. Homing is the same as on the 062, it's sensorless on X and Y, and it uses the same inductive probe on Z. But we have a dual Z screw setup, as I mentioned, or at least alluded to. This time we've got no sync belt. Instead it uses a clipper macro to straighten the gantry like this. And that of course means independent Z steppers are needed, otherwise it wouldn't be able to move them separately. At the time of review there is an error in the leveling code. I've passed this back to SOVOL. I presume they will just include it in the printer config. It's really not an issue, it's just one of those teething problems that we see every time there's a new clipper printer. It's easy enough for you to fix. Just use my printer config, which I will upload to the website. In terms of that clipper install, I'm happy to say that this appears to be a fairly vanilla clipper setup. You have a 5-inch display on the machine that's running clipper screen, and it just looks like basic standard clipper screen, and it works pretty much as you'd expect out of the box. SOVOL haven't given me SSH access, but This thing pops up on the router as an MKS Pi on the network, so no prizes for guessing the SSH password. Of course, it's the stock MKS one. If you need it, you can look it up yourself. I'm not going to do your homework for you. And being able to gain root access if you want it gives you full control over your install, potentially. I'm fairly sure when I open this screen up, I'm going to see an MKS Pi sort of thing in here behind the screen. And I also called this, by the way. I said that every Klipper printer in 2023 was going to use an MKS Pi. So far, I'm correct. But before I open it up, this is weird. Chances are you won't use this switch, but that's probably for the best since it's kind of weird. It sort of double clicks, it feels cheap. Maybe that's just on my model. We'll see what's going on inside here as well. Let's take it apart. And if we take a look inside the base of the printer, everything looks fine inside here. We've got a board I've not seen before. All the drivers are on the board, by the way, so the toolhead breakout it's not like a CAN or USB toolhead or anything. In terms of performance, the printer is pretty decent actually. The speed is good enough. The print quality is surprisingly good for a bed slinger with really neat layers. Here's a couple of examples of that. And the cooling ought to be generally quite good too. At the time of reviewing, the giant fan works fine, but only on the pre-sliced benchy. Because of the way it's set up in Klipper, it doesn't activate with the part fan, and to be clear, I don't want it to. But there needs to be a piece of code, this one specifically, added on around layer 3 or so, I would say, to turn this fan on. You can see why you wouldn't want to turn it on from the start of the print. Here's my standard tests, the usual low-effort test cube. This is available on printables and Thingiverse. And here's the bed adhesion and leveling test. You have input shaping available and an accelerometer is provided with the printer. This kind of thing does account for a lot of the extra price, by the way. I saw people making fun about the price. They're always going to do that, but compared to the SV06, you have a touchscreen, you've got to have an SBC, the MKS Pi, to run Klipper, and presumably more expensive to manufacture board because it's new. You've got a thicker double-sided PEI sheet, you've got lights on the hot end, you've got the new huge fan, you've got the volcano nozzle instead of the normal one from this is from the 06 Plus, and you've got a filament sensor. So I don't see this as bad value on the face of it. Yes, it costs a lot more than the SV06. Yes, you can Klipper the SV06. I don't really know what your point is there. Anyway, the only other thing I want to talk about here is that light on the hot end. It's actually pretty good because it's right over the piece rather than having a light high up that causes the hot end to cast a shadow. The only downside of having this huge thing on the front here is that you actually just can't see your print until it gets to a certain size. But you know what? If the cowling bothers you, 2 screws and it's gone. You can run it fine without the LEDs even, or you can rewire the LEDs. I suppose you want a summary before I pack up and go do something else. There is absolutely nothing wrong with this machine, Klipper config code changes notwithstanding, unless of course they fixed it by the time this review is released. I've reviewed I think 3 Klipper machines now, and this one was the easiest to get working out of the box. I imagine I'm getting better at doing that, but this one kind of just works, and the menus are logical because it's using the standard Klipper screen, and the network setup is entirely normal. Don't get me wrong, I do use the XSmart 3 daily, and Chidi are updating it to solve some of the problems that we had on release. Sovol's main problem then is that coming up to the second half of 2023 and beyond, they don't have to prove that this printer is better than the Hurricane for $400, which I presume is what they thought they would have to do. They have to prove to the buyer that this SV07 for $400 is better than this printer for $400. And one of the ways that Sovol could do that is to prove that this is more maintainable and more reliable, which will all hinge on good QA on these printers and good support afterwards. That, I think, is going to be very important. So there you go. That's the SV07. Let me know what you think. Don't bother telling me that it's got wheels or that it's not a Core XY. I've actually noticed both those things. Anyway, I will see you next time. Thank you for watching.